In this lecture, we are going to take a look at functions. We are going to see what functions are, what they do, and how to create functions by ourselves. Since our first lecture, we have seen what functions are. When we have used functions, we have used print function to print out something on the terminal. We have used input function to input something to our program. Now, those functions are what we call the built-in functions because we didn't create those functions. We only make use of the functions straight away because they are in the standard library that the Python programming language comes with. So, and basically that is the one of the essence of creating functions. When we create functions, whenever we are in need of those functions, we merely call them. We simply call them and make use of them to perform their task. And it is a way of what we call divide and conquer, thereby dividing our program into units, and each unit responsible for carrying out a particular task, thereby making our programs to be more organized. And it also helps in reinventing the wheel because when we have function in our program, whenever we are in need of it, whenever any part of our program, whenever in any part of our program we are in need of that function, we don't need to create those codes that made up the function. We simply call the function, it performs its work. We don't need to rewrite the code several times. We just code it once, and then whenever we are in need of it, we call it, and then it carries out its task, and anytime that we need it again, we call it again. So to avoid reinventing the wheel, code reusability, and divide and conquer approach to make our programs more organized. These are the reasons behind the creation of functions. Okay, so in this program, we are going to create a program that will use a function to find the maximum of 3 input. This input could be a string, and integers or floating point numbers. So let's start coding. So first, I'm going to define our function. So to define our function, we are going to make use of this keyword def. Now, this is a keyword that is used in declaring functions. So I'll call my functions maximum value, maximum value. So the name of my function is maximum value. And after declaring a function, now a function might need something to carry out its task. So it might, like when we invoke print function, we normally passes an argument to it, which is a string that we need it to output over the terminal. So since maximum value will also require something, the values that is going to determine which is the maximum. So while declaring it, we need to declare that it requires an argument whenever we call it. So, but in the process of declaring it, those arguments, we call them parameters. So I'm going to declare that this my function will require parameters. So let it have 3 parameters: x, y, and z. So y and z. So I don't have z on my, let me make use of the on-screen terminal keyboard. All right, z. All right. So basically here what we did here, we declare a function whose name is maximum value with 3 parameters x, y, z. So whenever we call this function, we must supply it with these 3 parameters as argument. So when we declare the function, we call them parameters. But when we invoke the function, when we call the function to make use of the function, we refer to them as arguments. Okay. So maximum equals to x. All right. So in line number 6, I created a variable called maximum, and I assign it with the value x. So I'm just making assumption that x is the maximum of these 3 numbers. Okay. Okay, so let me copy. I don't have z, I'll just copy it here, and then I can come and paste it here. So ellipse z is greater than maximum, maximum, then maximum, maximum equals to z. All right. So basically here I'm making comparison between y and z. If y is greater than maximum, so if y is greater than maximum, that means that maximum should have the value of y. The variable maximum should have the value of y. Now if the condition doesn't test true, now I'm trying to compare z with the maximum. So if z is greater than maximum, then maximum should be assigned with the value of z. All right. So finally, I'm going to return z. Okay, so I return the maximum. So at the end of function, because function, we expect function to carry out its task and return something to us. So like in this case, the basic task that this function perform is to perform comparison between three inputs and then determine the maximum value among those input and then return the maximum. So that is why we are making use of this return keyword in line number 13 to return the maximum. So any line of code that invoke this function will expect that it will return a maximum value to it. So anywhere we invoke this function, we are going to input three. We are going to assign it with three arguments, and then out of those arguments, we expect that the function will perform its work and return to us the maximum of those three input we assign to it as arguments. All right. Now we are going to make use of our function to determine the maximum of three integer inputs. Okay, so we are going to make use of this function to determine maximum value out of three integer input that we are going to assign to it as argument. Okay, so first of all, so let me write it as comment. Determine the maximum of three integer of three So next, let's get the first integer. So I'm creating a variable a, and then we are going to input this particular integer. So int, and then I'm going to invoke the input function, and then I'm going to prompt the user to enter the first integer. So enter the first integer. Okay, and then now the user will enter the first integer. Then let's create another variable, and then to get the second integer. So basically, let me just copy this to save time. So let me copy this one, paste it, and then I'll paste it here. So let me make this variable b, and then enter the second integer. Then enter the third integer. Enter the third integer c. Then we have it as c. Enter the third integer. All right. So before we go far, let's test out this. All right. So we haven't invoked the function. I only got the three input. All right. So now let's put a comment. So invoke the maximum function. The maximum function. So I'm going to invoke the maximum function. So let me just put it in a print statement. The maximum value of the three integers is okay. So the maximum value of the three integers is, and then I'm going to make use of this decimal integer. We have seen this in our previous lecture. This is a format control string for a decimal integer. So this will eventually be replaced by a decimal value, right? So and now I'm going to invoke the function, all right? And to invoke the function, we just write the name of the function name, which is maximum value, right? So maximum value, and then it requires argument. So we are going to input those three integer values as our argument, okay? So at this point, the maximum value, and okay, so this basically will execute maximum value, will execute and then return the maximum value out of these three integers. All right, so let's test the program first and see how it works before we proceed. So I'm going to clear the terminal. Let me clear the terminal. Now let's make sure that I have that particular function within the directory, which is function.py. Now Python 3 function.py, right? So enter the first integer. Let me enter 12. Second integer, let me enter 34. Let me enter 56. The maximum of the three integers is 34. Something is wrong with our code, so we need to go and check it and put it in order. Okay, all right, so basically what we are having here is what we call a logical error. So the error arises from the logic of our program, because basically what this program at this point does, in line number 8, it will test if y is greater than maximum, and if that condition is true, then it will not proceed to line number 10, it will jump to line number 13 and then return maximum, because that is exactly what we are having, because 12 is our x, and then y, it tests it with y, which is 34, and then it doesn't test it with z, which is 56, so it immediately returns 34 as the maximum value, and which is not true. So we are here and it is working correct, and the program works and give us output without any error, but only that the output is wrong, the result is wrong. So this kind of error is what we call a logic error. Okay, so I'm going to go over here and correct it. Instead of having a if, we are going to have two several ifs. All right, so let's have if. Okay, so let me save it, and then let's go over and run it again and see whether the program has been whether the problem has been rectified. So let me clear the terminal. I'll clear the terminal. Okay, so let me not clear the terminal. Let me run it so that we can see. Let's enter the same function line number 9. So line number 9 again, we are having another error. Line number 9, maximum. Okay, so maximum equals to y. Okay, so I deleted something, I didn't put it back. So let me save it again, and then now let's go back and run the code and see whether the problem has been rectified. Okay, so let me run it. Enter the first integer 12, enter the second integer 34, enter the third integer, which is 56. Okay, and we are having the maximum value of the three integers is 56, which of course is right. So the program is now working correctly. Now using this same program again, using this now let's try to test how the program will find us the maximum of three floating point numbers. So I will just copy this. Using the same function, we don't need to code another function again. So we don't need to code another function again. All we have to do is just to call the function again and use it to evaluate floating point numbers for us. So let me paste it here, and then I'll go over and put it right. Okay, so we have this print the maximum of three integers. So we have a equals to int. So instead of int, I'll change it to float. So float, enter the first floating point number. Enter the first floating point number. Floating point number. So here likewise, enter the second floating point number. floating floating point number. That way here. So enter the third floating point number. Floating point number. Right. So here I will just change it to plot. Alright, so we have it, enter the third floating point number. Okay, so print the maximum value of the three floating point numbers, of the three floating point numbers, numbers is, and then we are going to replace this decimal integer format control string with f, which is for floating point number, and then we are going to have, okay, so also the let's use d, and then here for the variables a, and then likewise here f. Okay, so also as argument, when we pass them as argument to the maximum value function, a b c d e f, so d, e, and then f. All right, so let me save it, and then let's run over it. Let's run the program again and see whether it is going to give us the desired result. So I'll come over here, I'll clean the terminal, and then run the code again. Enter the first integer, say 2, 3, and then 5. The maximum value of the three integers is 5. Okay, enter the first floating point number, 4.6, 5.7, then 8.9. all right, it's 8.900. okay, so we can make this program better. We can see it is congested, so let us go back and see how we can make this better. So instead of here, after printing the maximum value of the three integers, let's have an empty space. So to get an empty and a blank line, a white space, we can just make use of a print function with no argument. So this will basically print a white space. So print a blank line. So print a white space, space. So this will basically print a white space. Also, you can see the results on the terminal. We are having it 8.9000. So let's make it to 2 places of decimal. Okay, a floating point number with 2 places of decimal. All right, so to do so, we can just come here and write .2. Now this will print the floating point number as a floating point number with 2 places of decimal. Okay, so now we can go back and run the code and see whether the problem has been rectified. Okay, so run it. Enter the first integer 3, 5, 6. The maximum of the 3 integers is 6. Enter the first floating point number, 4.5, 5.6, 7.8. okay, the maximum value of the 3 floating point numbers is 7.80. so our program is working as expected. All right, so now let's see how we can use this same function to get us the maximum of 3 strings. Okay, so we have seen decimal integer, we have seen floating point number, and now let's try it out and see how it will evaluate strings as well. Okay, so let me print also a white space here. Print a white space. All right, so print a blank line. So also the name of the variables g, let me name this as h, and then also as I for the 3 variables to hold the 3 strings. So enter the first, not integer, enter the first string, and then enter the second string. Then here I can say enter the third string. Okay, so let me save it, and then I'll go down to the function call where we have it. This is S is a format control string for format control string for a string, and the maximum value, let me replace it with the variables that we used to input the string. So gh right, gh, and then comma I. Okay, so I. All right, so let me save it, and then let's run it and see how is whether it will give us the right result. So come to the terminal, clear the terminal, and then run it and see. Enter the first integer 2, next integer 4, and then 6. Okay, enter the first floating point number 5.6, and then enter the next floating point number 6.7, 8.0 is 8.00. Enter the first string. Okay, so let's let me write this as article. All right. Okay, so yes, so we are having an error. All right, invalid literal for int with base 10 article. So let's go back and see what the error actually is. Okay, so we are converting to int. I copy the code, I didn't remove this int, so let me remove this int, since already we know that input function will input whatsoever the user enter over the terminal. It is going to be accepted as a string, so it is actually a string. Whatsoever the input function got from the terminal is in the form of a string. So let me get rid of this. We're not converting it to int. So let me remove this, and then I'm going to remove this as well. So I'm going to save my program, and now I'm going to go back and run it again. So clear the terminal and then run it. Enter the first integer 2, 4, and then 6. And okay, so the maximum value of the integer 6. First floating point number 5.6, 7.8, and then 9.0. All right, so the maximum value of three floating point numbers is 9.0. Enter the first string. The first string article. Let me call it article. Okay, article, and then hacking. Now enter dot string. Let me call it programming. Programming. Okay, so the maximum value of 3 integers is programming. So programming is the word with the highest with the longest word, the word with the highest number of characters. So we can see that this program is working correctly, and we have seen the rationale behind using function. We coded the function once, and we call it in 3 places to perform a task. We call it 3 times in this particular program. We didn't need to record it each time that we need to make use of it. So when we wanted to make use of it to evaluate the maximum of 3 integers, we don't need to go and write this code all over again. We just code it once, and we call it thrice. So you have seen the rationale behind creating function in programming.